But I think it's very good that the rest of the world at least is, other than these specific powers, at least is soldiering on and not leaving the not leaving the subject. So I think Sanyalji,
yes,
are we waiting for somebody?
Sir,
so we can start now, I think.
Yes, Akansha Sharma ji has not yet joined. She is the head social impact and sustainability, Sterlite.
Sir, she has joined now.
She has also joined. I can see her name.
So, Ambassador Razan can start now.
Yeah, Akansha ji, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I think now we can start, sir. Everybody's
okay.
A very warm welcome to everyone attending this important appreciation to our Vice President.
We have lost your voice, Ambassador Rajan, please.
Somebody, can you hear me now?
Now, yes.
Yeah. I want to thank you, Mr. Senior Vice President, particularly, sir, for sparing your time to be with us. You've always been a source of great encouragement to the center. Thank you, Mr. Abbas, Akansha Sharma, and all the other distinguished panelists, Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, my friend and colleague, and several panelists who are, in fact, joining us from outside the country. The India-Nepal Center has had a series of meetings in the last few weeks, and we've had excellent participation both from India and Nepal, both from the government, from the public and private sector, from the academia, and from other disciplines. So that just goes to show that what one reads in the headlines about the friction between India and Nepal because of the maps that we inherited from either the East India Company or the British Indian government, that is not the totality of the India-Nepal story. The picture of two countries, two peoples, across the civil society, across the government institutions, etc., being very keen to expand and diversify their cooperation is very, very real. And we've had some very, very encouraging ideas and suggestions in the last few meetings. Today, we thought we would concentrate on a slightly different subject, which is not in the mainstream news so much these days, because everyone is now so busy counting the numbers on COVID infections, fatalities, etc., on a country-by-country basis, that one is thinking purely more or less in national terms everywhere, forgetting the fact that the SDGs are really meant to underline the fact that there is a common concern, a common interest, a common need cutting across boundaries, national boundaries. And I think this is particularly true of India and Nepal, because we have a 1,700 kilometer long open border. And you can imagine that if something goes terribly wrong with the SDGs in any one area, in either country, there's no way in which you can stop the problem from spreading to the other country. This is true of unemployment, this is true of health, infrastructure. You can name any of the important SDGs, and certainly climate change, a subject on which Mr. Jha will be speaking at great length. India and Nepal really should be giving much greater priority. The other day, Pope Francis mentioned that while we are all worried about the coronavirus, the greater virus is still to come. He was referring to rising inequality, what was a much bigger problem. And there was a head of state, a former head of state, who was speaking at an international conference that I attended yesterday, who said that climate change is an even bigger problem, because he said we are worried about the tomorrow after corona, and if we ignore the problem of climate change, there is going to be no tomorrow. So I think in South Asia, we have stopped really hearing about the need to cooperate between South Asian countries on the various important SDG goals. Because if South Asia, with 1/4 of the world's population, is not able to get its act together on COVID, on SDGs, then I think the entire SDG sort of effort is going to collapse at a global level, and South Asia will be suffering. And there is great tragedy around the corner because the SDG goals are still 10 years away, but the effects will begin to show in the next couple of years, if not earlier. So we have to wake up to the need to intensify our action across the board. This is not a problem only for governments. Governments will do their best, but they have their own limitations. I think across civil society, business, academia, even perhaps faith organizations, there is a need to have greater awareness, a greater wish, a greater will, and more institutional underpinnings in order to be able to tackle problems, share best practices, increase capacity building, anticipate the problems of water, health, MSME sector, in which the PhD is particularly well placed, problems of unemployment, etc., which are going to create huge social, economic, and perhaps political problems in our region. So I would particularly urge the business communities in India and Nepal to think of themselves as accelerators of the SDG process and become much more proactive, because if there is more cross-border business activity, more interdependence, more of sharing in terms of value chains or global or sub-regional chains, etc., then it is good for both countries. And I must mention here that as soon as the India-Nepal Center was set up, the Japan International Center contacted us and said that they would like to think of setting up small ancillary units in Nepal, which could link up with major component and manufacturing units in India. Now, perhaps the time for that kind of idea has come. And while we push for Make in India, Skill India, Self-Reliant India, etc., I'm sure that we are also keeping in mind the need to create stronger linkages with our neighbors, particularly countries like Nepal, use technology to advantage for all of us, and then move on to interdependent, intermutual, and much better environment in our sub-region and our region. So with these words, I would like to thank all of you for attending this meeting, and I would like to request our Senior Vice President, Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, to kindly give us his presidential remarks. Mr. Agarwal.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Rajan. It's really good morning to everybody, and it's really a pleasure for me to be a part of this important discussion today. It's my pleasure to welcome today's chief guest, Mr. Abbas Jha, Chief of Climate and Disaster Risk Management, World Bank, South Asia region. Guest of honor, Ambassador Manjeev Puri ji, India's former ambassador to Nepal. Session chair, Ambassador KV Rajan ji, of the Indo-Nepal Chamber Center, Indo-Nepal Center.
Yes, sir. Good morning.
नमस्कार सौरभ जी
बिल्कुल ठीक है सर.
सारे तो बात
Is Nirvan Chaudhary joined?
He's coming a little late. He asked us to.
Okay. All right. So welcome to him also, the Vice President of CNI, and all the other esteemed panelists and participants. On behalf of the PhD CCI and on my own, I express my heartfelt thanks to all of you for kindly having joined us, for interacting with us and inspiring the industry on this in these trying times in which even SDG seems to be a pretty less important subject compared to COVID, which seems to have taken all the mind space and attention of all of us. But I think we still need to keep working upon all the important issues that we face, and We cannot just look at COVID in exclusion to all other problems that we as nations and as a world, as humanity that we face. SDG being one of the most important of them. I would like to appreciate the invaluable contribution by various panelists here towards, whether from the government or from the industry, towards handling the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, which has been, as I said, the major, what I can say, disaster facing us in this, facing us all of this time for the last 6 months. It is in this recent world with COVID-19 and this prolonged lockdown, accomplishing SDG is therefore a much more important subject now for all United Nations member states like India and Nepal. Notwithstanding the challenges that the SDG or global goals should be redefined to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030. This, of course, we have to keep on stressing the importance of environment as a part of SDG. The removal of poverty, of course, being the other major aspect of SDG. All these things, I think we as a world, as all nations, and all who are members of UN or as part of the community of nations have to be all working together. And India and Nepal, in any case, are also impacted very strongly by all the issues that are covered by the overall umbrella of SDGs. To mitigate the economic losses and to ensure the rebound of economies under the aegis of India-Nepal Chamber and its association with the Confederation of Nepalese Industries (CNI), PSD-CCI organized remarkably successful web conferences strategizing economic rebounding and cooperation in India and Nepal 30th April 2020 and exploring hydroelectricity potential in Nepal on 23rd July 2020. Enhanced cooperation for MSMEs in Nepal on 31st of August 2020. So these are part of our ongoing efforts to cooperate and work between the chambers from Nepal and India on subjects that are crucial and critical for the well-being of our nations. The web conferences were attended by hundreds of participants from the government, industry, media, think tanks, and economic diplomacy fraternity. Now today, in association with CNI and PSDCCI's Indo-Nepal Center, we are sitting and meeting for this webinar on redefining SDG enablers for India and Nepal. For partnership and supporting this important initiative, we are thankful to Sterlite Technologies Limited, with whose company I am happy to share that our company Paramount Communications works along with STL in the telecom space on a regular basis. As you must be aware, the PSDCCI was established in the year 1905, and we have a long-standing reputation as the India's apex industry chamber. Since its inception, we have been working to promote the trade and industry with keeping the grand vision of to shape humanity in the most equitable manner. We have a large membership base touching more than 1.3 lakh members, but the largest possible number of them are from the MSMEs. And MSMEs, we all know, contribute significantly to the growth story of India and the South Asian region. When it comes to trade, there are strong pillars of global export and import ecosystems. Many of them, directly or indirectly, have had businesses in Nepal, and they are known for strengthening the foundations of our bilateral cooperation. In this difficult time, when our priorities are to keep India and the neighborhood safe from the severe challenges posed by the COVID-19, the industry and individuals are determined to work in close tandem with the all concerned and help the region to successfully come out of the crisis phase. Let us all reinforce our resolve to support the collective mission to defeat COVID-19 and to continue to be part of the holistic efforts for economic rebounding in India and Nepal. Even when the emerging scenario is full of uncertainties, it is surely a matter of big satisfaction how people are helping each other and the government and industry are playing their roles in mitigating the unprecedented risks and challenges. Moving forward, we are trying our level best to keep India's inclusive growth momentum on. In the process, we are very much open to engage with the industry fraternity in Nepal to carry forward the mission of creating shared prosperity in the South Asian region. Let's make frontiers to streamline the process of economic rebounding in our two countries. PSDCCI's India-Nepal Center will keep engaging with all the stakeholders for positive changes. PSDCCI has been doing remarkably well even in these trying times since the late March 2020. We have been actively working to support the government's efforts through policy advocacy, series of webinars, and generous contribution towards various funds. Overall, we are quite sanguine that this phase will pass and bring promising opportunities for India and a very friendly neighbor like Nepal. These all make our broad strategy for economic rebounding. It is important to share that the rest of the world, reset of the world, will seek very best from all of us, and we must be ready to reciprocate. As the key component for inclusive growth, the shared vision for achieving SDGs will be critically important. The new world that is being made will have enough for all, though it must be important to learn the wealth creation has to go in parallel with altruistic and caring acts. Let's all be a part of the economic rebounding through deepening of cooperation and the next transformation. Though in the process, it would be most crucial how we give traction to the SDGs. I hope today's deliberation of this webinar will go a long way in strengthening the Indo-Nepal economic ties and cooperation, with special focus on sustainable development. The Indian businessmen are keen for partnering with their counterparts in Nepal, and the other way around too. The prospect for partnership is very promising. With the right approach and progressive policies, actual potential for SDGs can surely be explored much more. We will keep working in this regard, and with the support of our partners in Nepal, we are hopeful for a deeper engagement among the businesses for sustainable development. I now really look forward to hearing the views of the eminent speakers that we have today, and really wish all the success and all the best to the webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Agarwal, for those words of encouragement. Relevant to the implementation of the SDG goals, despite the pain and the setback that COVID has caused to all our countries in this region and indeed throughout the world. I do hope that the PhD chamber will be looked upon as a privileged partner for the World Bank and other important organizations in their bid to revive the momentum in implementation of the SDG goals, particularly in our neighborhood. Thank you again, sir. May I now change program order slightly because of requests received from some of the individual panelists. I would like to request Mr. Abbas Jha of the World Bank to kindly make his presentation. Mr. Jha.
Thank you, Ambassador Rajan, and thank you for this very kind invitation. It's my pleasure to be here. Let me just share my screen. So I hope you can all see my screen now. So I'm going to be, thank you very much for this very timely panel. I think the SDGs are now even more relevant in the time of COVID, because although we are now in the midst of the pandemic, we are already thinking about how to rebuild economies after the pandemic. And one of the key questions is that how are we going to deal with the pressing issue of climate change? And so the title of my presentation is SDGs, Shocks and Resilience. And what I'm going to argue is that the regional dimensions of climate action is going to be imperative if we are to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So maybe just a quick reminder of the SDGs. So there are 17 SDGs, and as many of the speakers before me said, that 2030 is the deadline for achieving these. Now, there is no doubt that COVID has been a severe setback in achieving these goals. And I am going to be focusing primarily on SDG 13, which is the goal for climate action. Now, in case any of us need any reminders, this is just a graph to show you how severe the impact COVID-19 has been on South Asia. So we are going to see a contraction of 2.7% of GDP in 2020 instead of prior 5.5% growth that was forecasted before the pandemic. India has been hit hard. So the quarterly GDP growth figures that were released about a week ago showed a contraction of 23.9%, which is unprecedented. To my knowledge, this has never happened before in India. And needless to say that this will also have a severe impact on poverty across the region. Now, a quick word on the World Bank, where I work, and what we do with respect to the Sustainable Development Goals. So the World Bank has two goals, which are called the twin goals. The first is to end extreme poverty, and extreme poverty means people living on less than $1.10 a day. So the goal for that is to end extreme poverty by 2030. And the second goal is to boost shared prosperity. And by that, we mean the income of the bottom 40% of the population. And we do this in three ways. So one is by promoting sustainable and inclusive growth, which means by and large private sector led job creation. The second is to develop human capital. And by that, I mean health and education primarily, but also dealing with issues like stunting, which is a very, very big problem in South Asia. And then finally on strengthening resilience. And this is against climate change, but also against disasters. So let me begin my presentation with a story. And this is about the time of partition. Now, many of you may have heard that when partition happened, even chairs and tables were divided at that time. But there was one thing that was not divided, which was the weather data. So Professor Sunil Amrit of Yale has a beautiful story in his book called Unruly Waters, where he said that when partition happened, although everything was divided, weather data, 2 copies were made because this was considered a common good. So for both countries. So we shared the weather data at the time of partition. So this to me exemplifies the main point I'm trying to make, which is that with respect to climate change, with respect to disasters, regional cooperation is a very, very necessary element to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And nothing exemplifies the unity of the region than this beautiful map, which shows the Hindu Kush and Himalayan mountain range. So 10 river basins flow through this beautiful region of ours. And 1.9 billion people depend for food, water, and energy in this region. And this is now threatened by climate change. So we are seeing glacial melts that are unprecedented, and this is going to have a severe impact on water supply throughout the region. I'm very happy to see that Umair Ahmad from the Third Pole is also a panelist, and they do some really beautiful work on showing the impacts of the water crisis across the region. This is another map, which is from the New York Times from last week, which again shows really how interconnected the region is. So you're seeing all the river basins across the region, whether it's the Indus, the Amu Darya, the Tarim, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Irrawaddy. So it's not just South Asia, but East Asia. You can see how connected we are in terms of water, energy, and food. Now, I think Mr. Agrawal and Mr. Ambassador Rajan both spoke of the link between COVID-19 and climate change. So in The Economist magazine had a very nice line about this. It said that COVID-19 is like the climate change crisis, but with the fast forward button pushed. So we're seeing, risks accelerated. We are seeing what would have been a gradual onset from climate change. We're seeing many of these trends accelerated because of COVID-19. In the words of the US military, climate change is a force multiplier, threat multiplier. So it just makes risks that are already there much worse, and these are non-linear risks. So that, to me, again, underlines the need for climate change, for cooperation on climate change. Now, coming to the climate vulnerability. So the World Bank has done a number of studies on this, and there is no doubt that South Asia is possibly the hardest hit region in the world from climate change. So 800 million people, it's estimated, will be pushed into living in areas which will be climate hotspots, ranging from moderate to severe. McKinsey just came out with a report a couple of weeks ago on climate change in Asia, and they estimated that Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh will have amongst the first cities in the world which will become unlivable because of climate change. It's estimated that 100 million people will be pushed back into poverty. We may have up to 40 million climate refugees. So really, it's the impacts of climate change are going to be catastrophic. Now, coming to emissions, so the carbon emissions in the region, it's really India right now that is the big emitter of carbon dioxide. So India is the fourth largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world. But that said, Bangladesh and Pakistan are rapidly growing. So if it's business as usual, if Bangladesh and Pakistan keep their energy mix as is, then they are also going to be significant emitters. I don't need to tell this audience that air pollution is a very, very severe problem in the region across Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and Pakistan. But there is some good news. So we are seeing a lot of very good news on renewable energy. So for example, the Rewa solar plant that was that closed recently, the financial bids just closed. It was amongst the lowest electricity prices in the world. So we are seeing an explosion of solar energy across the region, very affordable solar energy, which at sometimes is much cheaper than coal or gas. So there are positive stories that are coming out from the region. I talked about air pollution, and I want to show you this satellite imagery between January, March, and then March and April. So January and March is the sort of the pre-COVID time. And this shows the air pollution across India. And then you can see how it dropped, with the lockdown and so on and so forth. Now, the question is, how do we lessen air pollution without shutting down the economy? That is really the challenge, right? Now, coming to regional cooperation in South Asia, it is unfortunate that South Asia is the least interconnected region in the world in terms of trade. So if you look at East Asia, for example, 40% of total trade in East Asia is intra-regional, so between countries in the region. In sub-Saharan Africa, it's 22%. But for South Asia, it's as little as 5%. So there is no doubt in my mind that there is a lot of upside gain to be had if we can increase intra-regional trade in the region. So this is one clear message that I would like to leave with you. And if you're interested in more details, we have a really good report called A Glass Half Full that came out in 2018 about how we can go about promoting regional cooperation in trade in South Asia. And regional cooperation is also crucial for climate action. So I'm just going to talk about two areas, which is electricity trading, and the second is early warning systems and hydrometeorological services. This is just a slide about how the World Bank approaches regional integration, cooperation, and engagement. I think we bring to the table the ability to convene multiple stakeholders. I remember someone telling me that when the World Bank and governments come together, we can say things together that neither of us can say apart. So that in a kind of exemplifies the convening power of the World Bank in this regional debate. So, so by energy cooperation for climate, what we mean is essentially the regional energy trading markets that are now underway, and they're quite developed between India, Nepal, and Bangladesh, for example. And the positive element of this is that there's a very the energy resource endowment is very complementary. So in India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, you have an energy system that's largely dependent on gas and coal. And in Bhutan and Nepal, you have huge hydro electricity resources. And it's quite complementary. So the wet season in Bhutan and Nepal corresponds with the summer peak demand in India and Bangladesh. And the dry season in Nepal coincides with lower demand in India. So India can then export power to Nepal. So there have been a lot of positive developments, as I said. And the World Bank has estimated that if we had South Asia regional power integration, the savings could be up to $222 billion, which is very significant. And this is based on the experience, for example, of building of the 140-kilometer Nepal-India, Dhalkebar-Muzaffarpur transmission line. That's India-Nepal. And then the Bangladesh-India high-voltage direct current transmission line. So these initiatives, in the short run, they address electricity shortage, but in the medium run, they really maximize climate mitigation benefits. So one thing that I do want to mention here is that in 2018, in December, the government of India issued some guidelines on third-party power wheeling. So what that means is that Bhutan selling power to Bangladesh using India's power lines. So kind of a transmission through India, where India is not a purchaser of power. This, I think, was a very positive development, and this actually gave a jump start to the regional power market. So a lot of good things happening in this space. I do also want to mention the Central Asia, South Asia energy project, which connects Tajikistan and the Kyrgyz Republic, both of which have massive hydroelectric resources to Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now, turning to hydromet services, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this area, but we have done studies which show that early warning systems are possibly the best investment that a government can make. So we have estimated that $1 invested in early warning systems can save up to $4 to $8 of avoided losses later on. And there's huge gaps across the region in hydromet services, and in particular, for example, in Bhutan and Nepal, they are some of the most dangerous airports in the world. So, hydromet services can be used to improve safety. In Bangladesh, farmers can use that for better decision-making at the farm level. We saw the benefits of improved forecasting, for example, when Cyclone Fani made landfall, and millions of people were evacuated successfully. So this is really an excellent investment that governments can make. And there is a lot of benefit for regional cooperation. And I want to give you a story, share a story with you. So when I worked in East Asia and I went to Laos, Laos is a tiny and very poor country and bordering Thailand. And the hydromet chief of Laos told me that he wants to use World Bank investments to buy Doppler radars. Now, the irony of this is that they are right on the border of Thailand, and Thailand has an excellent network of Doppler radars. So there is no need for them to buy Doppler radars. They could just piggyback off the already existing system. So that kind of situation exists in South Asia also. So you have, for example, the IMD, the India Meteorological Department, which is a very capable, very able body. They can do a lot of regional work where other countries in the region can piggyback off their resources, and that would be very efficient. The same with early warning systems. This is just a quick snapshot of the huge portfolio the World Bank has on hydromet and disaster risk management across the region. In every country, we are doing work, including India and Nepal, as you can see. A very positive development is this South Asia Hydromet Forum, which started 2 years ago, which is kind of an expert body across the region of hydrometeorological agencies and their staff. So the first one was organized in Geneva, which had 80 participants, and the second one had 100 plus participants in Kathmandu. So just to end, some practical things that I feel could be done. I'm not blind to the geopolitics of the region, and there might be difficulties in certain areas, but there are certain things that I feel must be done and should be done. So one is, for example, data sharing protocols. I think all the countries in the region will benefit from that. I don't see any downside in that. Similarly, early warning systems. Again, you have these, like the IMD could be issuing early warning systems for across the region. We have the capacity to do that. Similarly, capacity building and knowledge sharing, like the South Asia Hydromet Forum that I mentioned. And then finally, regional investment master plan. So in areas like hydromet services, water, inland waterways, for example, between India and Bangladesh, energy, I've already mentioned the regional trading, and trade logistics, there is a lot of benefit if we could do investment planning at the regional level. as opposed to the national level. These are things that I feel that there's not much downside to it, and there's a tremendous amount of upside for all the regions. So I'll stop here, and thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir. Very illuminating. Thank you. Ambassador Rajan, you have to unmute yourself, sir.
Thank you. Sorry, I think I've been unmuted by the boss somewhere. Am I audible now? Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible now. Yeah.
No, I wanted to thank Mr. Jha for a very comprehensive and thought-provoking presentation. I think there are so many takeaways in that presentation about what India and Nepal can do together and what the region can do together to achieve its full potential, particularly in the wake of COVID and what follows, that we will definitely study it very seriously and try and follow up on these various ideas contained in it. So thank you very much, Mr. Jha. I'd like to request Ambassador Manjeev Puri now to kindly share his thoughts and bring us up to date about what precisely is happening in terms of cooperation between India and Nepal on SDGs and any other aspect that you would like to speak about. Manjeev, floor is yours.
Master Rajan, thank you very much. Sanjay ji, PhD, thank you very, very much. And I fully understand it's late in the evening in Washington and Abbas needs to take off. But Abbas, thank you very much. Sir, I don't know how to thank the PhD chamber because you've invited me for a subject or a discussion which actually intersects two of my major areas. Of course, as Ambassador of India to Nepal till recently, India-Nepal ties. And the second one is sustainable development, climate change. And I was India's lead negotiator for years at each of these, including SDGs. So let me tell you a little story, because I think that's a little important. If you look at these SDG figures, the 17 SDGs, of course, they first of all point out something very simple, that the UN is a mother place. Everybody's ideas have to be incorporated if you want to get anything through. And that's also important because it brings in a certain buy-in to whatever you want. Can everyone hear me clearly, please?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You know, when the MDGs were announced in the year 2000, they were not an intergovernmental process. The Secretary General came up with the idea, and poverty alleviation or reduce poverty was the main goal. But when it came to the SDGs, the same idea was thought that we should make it an affair of the Secretary General. But remember, by the year 2007, 28, other issues had started coming to the fore, principally the rise of the emerging economies, especially China, but let's not underestimate India, Brazil, Nigeria, and several others. And hence, that huge effort that we should try and bring in this word sustainable, which is nothing wrong, perfectly fine as far as we are concerned in India, a country which lives in harmony with nature, something that we certainly wanted. But the idea really was that the whole set of issues dealing with growth and development should be given a second status, in a sense. Even though the world was still faced with abject poverty, abject hunger, etc. So please look at the way the chart got finally designed. This happened fundamentally as a result of the fact that the SDGs became an intergovernmental process. And I'll be very honest to say, I'm very proud of having been one of the individuals who insisted that it should be an intergovernmental process and not something over the head of the Secretary General, which invariably means a Western-dominated kind of an idea. Now, Abbas has made some very good points, but I think one fundamental point that we all need to understand. Look what COVID has done. Never in the history, and I think I'm willing to include the Spanish flu.
Sir, excuse me, please, for one moment, please. Host, will you please mute everybody except the speaker? There are disturbances coming on. We are not able to hear him clearly. Please put everybody on mute, except the speaker, of course.
May I, sir? Thank you. Sanjay ji, thank you very much. I want to make this one sort of very big point. The entire set of issues related to sustainable development, if you look at COVID, it's a very beautiful example. Never in the history, at least modern history, has the world had such a severe tanking of the economy. The global GHG emissions are going to go down by 7 or 8 or 10% or whatever it is. And yet, what is the end outcome? We are barely meeting the Paris climate goals. What does this point out to us? I think we should understand this a little bit. That with the tanking of the global economy, Great Britain very proudly says that for the first time in their recent history, there are no coal-fired power plants which are running out there. Well, that's happening because Great Britain has never faced such a debacle. Not only during the Great Depression, it wasn't so bad. I think they're tracing it back to the 1500s or something. Despite this kind of a situation, you are seeing a situation that you are barely able to meet the climate goals. I think this tells us that exactly the point which has been repeatedly sought to be avoided. That is, since this is a man-made problem, let humans come together. Let's look at technological solutions. Let's try and see what we can do, not just switch off. So Greta Thunberg taking a ship and crossing a boat and crossing the Atlantic, very good idea, sir. All of us will be in bullock carts. Even then, you will not be possibly able to make it. A point I'm trying to stress is that mitigation actions are important, and India has been in the lead. In fact, India on solar power alone has been one of the great leaders of the world, and we've been doing very well. We are now being strongly advised by people to be a little more cautious in giving a freer rein to coal. Good points, understandable and important. Abbas, you mentioned something about disaster relief. Look, India took the lead in having this entire initiative on climate disaster resilient infrastructure. So, India is very strongly in both these elements, the adaptation drive, especially through resilience and infrastructure building, and in terms of even changing the pattern and mitigation in that sense, in terms of solar energy. India has a very interesting situation. Today, solar power is cheaper in India than coal-fired power plants' electric costs, except that this is only during the daytime when power is being generated. At night, coal is still cheaper. And so we really need to ensure that we do have coal, but we need to better our technologies, etc. But it is quite possible that in the next 3 to 4 years, the bids which come in as a result of these solar power plants that we are setting up, they might allow for a lower rate, even in terms of a 24-hour supply pattern. But we have to wait and see. Coal is going to be certainly very important for us, but we need to try and see what we can do in terms of its emission, in terms of other factors. I think this point is extremely important. But most important is, can we get the world to do something in terms of better technological responses to the situation that we have created, again, as a result of technology itself? So this is the first big point that I would make to everyone. My other little thing is, and Mr. Jha very rightly said that he's, of course, fully familiar with the geopolitics. So, Abbas, when you say that, there are common goods, and you start off your entire presentation by looking at countries in South Asia, which is, let me say, down from the Himalayas, the way we have always traditionally accepted ourselves as the landmass that we are. And yet, just look at what the tendency at the moment is, whether it's geopolitics or anything else, it's just trying to look beyond the Himalayas. I don't know what we are going to get out of it. I'm not sure what's going to come out of it. I don't think there's much of an interest on the other side either. But this is, geopolitics. We need to try and see what we can do, because the situation is particularly dire at the time of COVID. You very rightly focused on India. We are by far the largest, and what happens to us is certainly very important. One slight digression. Again, you mentioned this thing about we being the least connected. Just think about it. Exactly 75 years back, we were a domestic market. And so the question of not being well connected did not arise. This is a situation which has come about as a result of something else being imposed on the way connectivity was. And yes, because it was imposed in a manner that actually brought about separation, how can we expect that there would be connectivity? We have to, in some senses, get over our own 75 years, one way or the other. But let me try and now bring my focus to Nepal. I have very little doubt that on several areas of the SDGs, especially those dealing with equality, inclusion, stuff like that, let me say distributive justice, Nepal is possibly doing better than India, even though statistics may show something completely different. It's as a result of the politics in Nepal. The kind of ground level empowerment is fantastic in that country. You go to any small village, anywhere far away. You similarly see the same things in terms of internet connectivity. Smallest villages in Nepal have internet connectivity. Everybody carries smartphone. It's mostly as a result of the fact that 25% of the country's population is overseas and not really in India, all over the world. It is a country which gets $8 billion in remittances, which is about 30% of its GDP. Just look at the kind of figures. It's the 5th largest remittance-dependent economy in the world, the others being Tajikistan, Haiti, and others like that. So Nepal is a very special and a very specific kind of case. And I'd like to make just one or two big points on that. I'm very happy for them that on this equality side, whether it's gender, even in terms of education, health, etc., they are able to manage a number of things. Now, they may not have All India Institute of Medical Sciences or something like that, but many small countries in the world, including well-developed ones, don't have super specialty, highly great institutions. They're very good basic to somewhere towards being able to manage very many things in healthcare, education, etc. The need for the highest order of things is really only for the largest players in the world, if I leave Europe out of the game. So Nepal, I think, is doing well in all of them. Where Nepal's real problem is that it's not growing its economy. And this is something to do with the political system in the country, which has never placed emphasis on wealth creation. Where all other issues have been extremely important, but the idea of wealth creation and growth has never been very strong. Rent seeking is the one that we all talk about, etc. But if they don't get over with that, then I'm afraid jumping from 159th position out of 186 countries in terms of GDP per capita in nominal terms is going to be a very tough challenge. And they need to understand, in terms of COVID, I'd make a very simple point. If you are getting 30% of your GDP from remittances, and you see that the countries from where much of this remittance are coming are also taking major hits, you are going to see a fall in remittances. When you see a fall in remittances, what is it going to happen in your economy? A, you will have less inflows and therefore less money to splurge and have ambitions which should not have been actually theirs, but which became yours. Secondly, you will have good people returning and no jobs for them. What do you do in such a situation? Look, my answer to all of this is very simple. The one economy with whom they have integratedness as a result of their forefathers' action, as a result of not what you and I have done. We've possibly only smoothed the things through a pipeline, integrated checkposts, and so on and so forth. But in terms of what is given, the knowledge of the Indian economy, we are ourselves taking a very big hit, no doubt about it. But given the nature of India-Nepal relations, we are the obvious point for them to be able to, be part of what we are doing. And if we are having a huge big package in India, whether much of it is only monetary policy, but there are issues in Atmanirbhar, and Nepal would get covered, and Nepalese would certainly get covered in that. So there are so many issues, so many possibilities for them. But the answer really lies in thinking that, you have to grow your economy. Even if you want to achieve these 17 of them, you can shut down and it's still not giving us what the world wants. You have to grow. You have to become more competitive. Mention was made of the high voltage transmission lines between India and Nepal. Now, one of the things that Nepal always everybody spoke about in terms of a panacea for development was hydropower. But we've just said that even coal now looks out of fashion because it is economically becoming very unviable. And today in the world, if we leave India out, let us ask how many countries do you have major investors who would be able to raise money to invest in coal plants? I think the answer is almost zero. In Europe, reputational reasons, nobody will give you money. In the United States, it will be very tough. Even in Australia, it's a very tough call. This is the kind of situation. And Nepal has possibly just missed the bus on hydropower. And this was something which many people said that, the opportunities that you have, you may get a second chance, but let me tell you, you do not get chances one after the other. Today, we are building this Arun 3, which is a 900 megawatt project. If this project comes through, in the eastern part of Nepal, there would be a sea change in terms of both electric power availability and in terms of the economics of that area. In India, it would make a small difference to the overall availability of electric power. But if you won't take Pancheshwar, and Ambassador Rajan was present when the famous Mahakali Treaty was signed some 20 odd years back, we are still going here and there on it. And ideas that, you mentioned this thing about cross-border transmission. Why is these ideas? Why do these ideas keep getting stuck? Essentially, each of these ideas get stuck because of certain ideas which the Nepalese bring into the core, which does not allow for cooperation to take place, but keep trying to find ways and means of a third party, in particular China, to get in. Now, you mentioned Bhutan, Bangladesh power trade. There can certainly be power trade between Nepal and Bangladesh, true. But if you will keep on and on with the idea that Nepal is that great yam between two countries, sir, you're very welcome to sit with the yam. Because remember, all the other countries of South Asia, and I am mindful when I say this, all the others have options all around the place. And each and every one of them is exploring them and trying to take things forward. I therefore very strongly believe that if there are Nepalese colleagues on this, they would take this hint and look at the fact that COVID itself is a wake-up call of a big one. It's not a small little matter that we'll get over the health emergency. It's about what it has done to the economy. It's about what is possible to do. And therefore, if they take this wake-up call and see what you can do in terms of linking up with by far the largest economy in this region. I know that Pakistan and Bangladesh are growing, and I like to tell my own compatriots in India very often, please be mindful of them. Just as we are on the way to becoming the third largest economy of the world, they are also going to be in the largest 15 in the world. Remember that. But having said this, where the 1 to 5 are and where the other 15 are is a world of a difference. And this is where you have the opportunity. And in my opinion, it is for Nepal one of the good opportunities and an opportunity that should be taken by them. I'd be very happy if there are other questions, etc., to address to me. But I believe that it is critically important that even in this very difficult times, when we are taking macro hits and aggregate hits, that we look in terms of wealth creation and see what we can do. Because once you have the wealth, you can distribute it on all the other areas for improving the quality of life of your people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being so frank also.
Yes, indeed. I think it's a very frank reminder of what India can learn from Nepal. Some of the success stories in Nepal are just not known here. They've done a wonderful job even on the community management of some of their projects, which we know very little about. So there are a lot of things that we can share with each other, learn from each other. But I think governance has a lot to do with the speed at which Nepal and India are taking advantage of all the assets that they share. So we leave it at that, and I'm sure that we'll be able to go over some of these points in the discussion come, I'd like to request Ms. Akanshika Sharma, Head of Social Impact Sustainability, Sterlite Technologies, to please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for firstly having me here, and with a special mention to Atul for putting all of this together. So I represent the private sector, and I think in the context of sustainable development goals, the role of private sector is increasingly important. Also, with the SDG ranking of both India and Nepal, which is 117 and 96, it creates a dire need for the private sector to contribute more and more. I would just like to share a few data points, which is recently got published in the Bain India report, which says that the contribution of the private sector on social funding has increased to about 11% over last decade. There's also one interesting fact that India has over 31 lakh NGOs, which is double the number of schools and 250 times number of government hospitals in the country, which clearly shows the fragmented effort and the lack of collaboration, in on non-result oriented outcomes in some way, which has placed both the countries on, beyond 100 numbers. I represent a company which is one of world's leading data network innovators.
Akanksha,
And
sorry,
we
you are
cannot.
not visible. Akanksha, you are not visible. If you can please put on your. Yes, you
I'm
please.
so sorry.
Okay. No, it's all right, please.
We cannot deny the need of technology that goes hand in hand with economic development and is integrally related to it. We have the ultra-fast 5G wireless technologies that has been widely hyped as potentially transformative development, and on par with the advent of electricity, as it can play a decisive role in the progress towards achieving the sustainable development agenda. Also, we have, beyond enabling the delivery of traditional schooling, 5G is creating opportunities for entirely new approaches to learning. Some type of remote surgery have been possible for a while, but the speed of 5G connectivity creates important new opportunities, not just for the lives of patients who cannot access a surgeon with relevant expertise, but also in training aspiring doctors. And there are many more, like blockchain is another one technology which is gaining a lot of traction in the social sector. But I still feel that there is a great need for the social sector, especially on the SDG front, to integrate more and more technology solutions. And we'll be surprised at the numbers that the lowest number of the fourth industrial revolution applications were found to occur across the goal number 1, which is no poverty, goal number 5, which is on gender, and goal 14, which is life below water. And in broadest sense, these goals are either recognized as linked with either market failures or considered for public good. However, the technology integration on all of these goals for SDGs have been really very low across the world. I would also like to share a few elements about how social sector is an important element for both policy framing and international relations, and what role can businesses can largely play. The real transformative potential of 2030 agenda can be achieved through a systemic approach, as we all know, and that helps in identifying and manage trade-offs while maximizing co-benefits. We have also realized that the private sector and the substantial role for businesses in this area to play towards achieving the targets is really important. And businesses are increasingly going beyond the usual practice of just looking at their goals. In fact, most of them are coming up with the sustainability reports, which is a clear commitment to being more transparent and continue contributing towards the sustainable development agenda. Several companies approach SDGs in different manners. However, alignment is basic assumption, which is not monitoring and reporting, but also related to how businesses are contributing more in-house and also in the communities on inequality, environmental damage, and of course, climate change. At STL, we embrace all the sustainable development goals core to our agenda, not just through our community initiatives, but also through sustainability. We have been, going beyond this to ensure that our products are completely eco-friendly, and we became the world's first integrated optical fiber manufacturer to be 100% zero waste to landfill certified. So this is just one example to say that how businesses are increasingly going and moving forward towards contributing towards the SDGs. If we look at some of the data points that I have here, the funding of the private sector towards SDGs has increased from 12 crores INR to 55 crores INR over a decade. And private contributions have started transitioning towards more planned approaches beyond a stronger and more diversified ecosystem. However, as we are seeing, disparities are increasingly growing, which clearly says that it needs much more structuring, and therefore forums like this and what Mr. Jha said, and I think there's a larger intervention for private sector to collaborate more closely with the government and the multilateral agencies. So that's all from my end.
Sir, you are muted. Ambassador Rajan sir, you are muted.
I just wanted to thank Ms. Sharma for her presentation and for giving us a glimpse of what the private sector could do to be really a kind of a cornerstone also for attaining the SDGs. May I now request Mr. Omer Ahmed, if he's here, South Asia editor of the Third Pole, if he could please address us. Mr. Omer Ahmed.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm not on video. I'm actually right now in Gorakhpur, and my connectivity is not excellent. Excellencies, Ms. Sharma, Mr. Jha, and everybody else who's attending, thank you for this. I want to quickly make a few points, some that Ambassador Puri had already highlighted. And I wanted to focus it slightly on exactly when we talk about inclusive development, who do we mean? One of the things that the pandemic highlight has shown very clearly is how fragile much of the economic systems right now are. Across Nepal and actually across India in different ways, people have been forced to leave their jobs, right? I mean, the remittances, which make a huge part of the economy in Nepal, have been severely hit. The remittances in India, which are not just of coming from internationally, but also from people in bigger cities sending money back to small towns, has been massively hit. And what that actually highlights is that we have a mode of governance, a mode of economic development, which is pushing vulnerable people into situations that over which they have very limited control. And let's be very honest here. This pandemic is just the first of many disasters that we are going to increasingly face. We've seen many of these disasters. We see them almost all also on an annual basis with the floods that have happened across the Ganga basin that winds through Nepal, through Bihar into Bangladesh. We've become almost kind of, blasé that millions of our people are displaced, impoverished, and these are people who obviously generally do not have any kind of insurance. If they lose their houses, if they lose their livelihoods, there's no way that they're going to recover that. I want to quote very quickly from a report that the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, the Institute of Technology, Gandhinagar, and the Council on Energy, Environment and Water had done recently, which had estimated that in 2013-14, in that financial year, India alone had spent about $100 billion coping with the costs of climate change. These costs are projected to increase up to $360 billion by 2030. These are costs that are not being offset, right? And these are costs that are often being borne by the very poor. So when we talk about where our economy is headed and where our economic growth has to be, we have to make sure that we don't have a situation where our people are continuously being punished for things that they're not responsible for. That's just immoral, wrong, but it's also deeply destructive of the stability of our countries. I'm going to put up a very link to a series of 3 stories that we did on the Mahakali Basin. And this is just on the border of India, Nepal. And I'm just going to share it right now. You guys can, these are photo stories, but it's about women on the Mahakali Basin on the Nepali side, finding agency within the structures of how Nepal has changed its governance pattern to a more federal one. Now, these are women whose earning male members in their families are largely somewhere else. They're either in Kathmandu, they're either in big cities in Delhi, or they're in some job abroad. But in the absence of the men, these women have found through social network, and I mean social network, not internet social network, I mean local NGOs, as well as reaching out to government officers as a way to make themselves self-reliant. And that's a huge learning process because we need that self-reliance, we need that development happening at our tier 3, at our tier 4 cities, in our villages, for it to be stable development so that it isn't destroyed so easily when such a tragedy hits. We need a more resilient economic political structure that allows us to buffer these losses and to be able to I'm not going to say de-link ourselves from the global economy. That's not really what I think any of us want. But we need to be, Nepal, South Asia as a whole, has a huge history of doing riverborne trade. And that's been pushed recently through the 4 countries coming together, India, Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, to try to push through riverborne trade. That has to be done in a way that incorporates local actors, fishermen who can benefit small communities that live by these rivers in a win that works for global industry in the sense of cost of freight going down, in a way that builds up local communities so that they're stable and they don't have to be dependent on moving to some other place where they might be exploited, might not be taken care of, and might be incredibly vulnerable. That these things can fit together with a certain stability of the environment so that we are not so vulnerable to these type of things. In that sense, the transition that has to happen in India and Nepal, and actually generally across the world, but because we're here now talking about India and Nepal, has to be one that can be an energy transition, but that also is a matter of including local actors in the ground so that they can be prosperous. When we talk about inclusive growth, we cannot have it that very large contractors are making large amounts of money in areas that are themselves, the people there are themselves poor and are made more poor. It has to involve local actors for it to actually mean a stable prosperity. Otherwise, we're going to have political protests which will bog down all economic development. And that's not in the interest of anybody. Lastly, and I really want to thank Ambassador Puri on raising this point, is that we need to find partnerships between developing countries and developed countries to make that energy transition. I know, and I've spoken to our senior diplomats and how long they've argued about loss and damage with developed countries, and how deeply that problem has become stuck because developed countries actually do not want to compensate the world for their costs. And honestly, I'm not sure that we can wait for that issue to resolve. What we need to do is work with local actors, possibly smaller countries, to find ways that we can work together. So for example, India and Norway signed the agreements on a blue ocean economy to see how well both India and Norway could cooperate. Now, Norway is a tiny country by India's comparison to India's size, but its coastline is actually equivalent, and it has a robust fishery economy, something that would be in a great interest for India to develop, given its huge coastline and given its poverty among fisher communities along that coastline. These are kind of the transitions that we need to focus on, that are ways that we can find less confrontational possibly. And as Mr. Jha said, we need institutions that have the convening authority to bring people together, to find ways that private companies, that local administration and actors, as well as governments, can talk to each other and find ways to move forward together. And I'm going to end on that point. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ahmed. I think what you said is extremely important and quite close to some of the thinking that is going on in India and elsewhere about the need to give more local ownership and local really leadership to the economic transformation of the new structures that we are thinking of. And you're very right that in Nepal, I still remember many years back visiting a poverty alleviation project, which was a success story run by the UNDP. And it was being entirely run by the women in the villages because the men were too busy either working outside or busy with their drinking habits. And this was a tremendous success story, but the pity of it is that it has not really been picked up and spread elsewhere in the way it should have been. But I'm sure we'll come back to this point in a little while. I would like to request Mr. Akhilesh Upadhyay, a very senior, highly respected journalist and thinker from Nepal, to now share his views with us. Mr. Upadhyay?
Thank you, Mr. Rajan. Mr. Rajan, rather. Can you hear me all? Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank PSD CCI and India Nepal Center for this excellent opportunity and webinar. And thanks also to Ambassador Rajan and Ambassador Puri, two of whom I know personally very well. And of course, fellow panelists and Atul, of course, for putting it all together, not a easy task all the time. My brief, as I talked to Atul, was more to focus on Nepal. As I listened to the presentation, I realized that I could have emphasized a little more on Nepal and India, which I will subsequently do. However, but a good part of my presentation will be SDG and pretty much Nepal focused. And I mean, first of all, I would like to see Nepal's SDGs, in my presentation, put in a framework of 4 I's. And I'll probably add one more I, which is international, as I listen to you all. one is, of course, identification of priorities and issues. There are 17 goals and 169 targets, for example. So Nepal needs to prioritize which of these are its areas and its focus. And it need not listen to New York too much on that score. More Nepal's public sector, private sector, and the others could sit together and decide which are the priority areas. First of all, I would personally think, first of all, that since SDGs are natural evolution of MDGs, the unfinished business of MDGs could be first, should be the first focus, I would say. Then, of course, growth and jobs, they are very, very important to us, just as they are to India. And of course, I would say promotion of clean energy, and that's another focus that will then lead to a whole set of new jobs and new sectors, hopefully. And now with COVID pandemic at place, this is a scenario you just can't avoid. Probably a large investment in health sector, but also various other sectors in view of the pandemic being what it is now. We all know it. Some of my predecessors just spoke now that India, for example, has seen the biggest contraction in its recorded history, economic contraction, that is. And Nepal hasn't done too well either. It's not so bad. Thankfully, remittance has held off as of now, but who knows? As the Gulf economies don't do well, many of Nepalese then travel to India. If India sees contraction, how can Nepal not hit recession? But the data last available is that in the last quarter, we grew by probably like less than 1%. But recession is just around the corner, I guess. So I would, as the projection for the as the projection is for SDGs, let me offer 3 scenarios, as has been documented by the government projection also. So here is the optimal scenario. It's aligned with the government aspiration to achieve an average of 8.67% of annual growth and revenue collection to reach 25% by the end of GDP cycle, SDG cycle, which is 2030. Then the low growth scenario, second one, lower revenue collection of 25% by 2030, but continuation of an average of 8.67 annual growth. Then there's a far normal scenario, as we call it, annual growth rate of 5.2% and revenue collection of 25% of GDP. Now, these are the scenarios. I am not going too much into COVID because I take in account that the planners or the geopolitics, we are well aware that one, let's not put that only to geopolitics. Nepal has seen 2 major shocks in recent years. One, of course, the 2015 earthquakes, 7.8 in magnitude, and that completely devastated many sectors of the economy, not to talk about livelihoods and the lives lost and the properties lost, etc. And the other major shock, which actually accompanied the reconstruction phase of the earthquake, was the border blockade, which lasted for 4 months. So keeping those recent shocks in mind, I would like to think, I would definitely hope that no matter how bad the COVID is going to be, the shocks are taken into account, and over a long period until 2030, things will have leveled off, let's say, and then hit, if not the high growth rate that the government projects of 8.67, at least moderate 5% of the growth. Now, let me go to the 5 areas, 4 areas basically, but also the 5th, which I call international identification of priorities, And when I say identification of priorities, I already said, Nepal doesn't have to exactly listen to what the New York sets as its priority. It will have to take its own national priorities in account and then see what the areas are in terms of focus for SDGs, goals and targets. Now the investment gap, the projection is that in the SDG period until 2030, Nepal will have 35 to 45% funding gap. Now, how can that be made? Who will be the people or the institutions, more accurately, the institutions that need to be approached? I'll discuss that a bit in the 5th section, which is international. A lot of it, of course, will come through public funding, at least in the initial stage of the SDG. But of course, the private sector will shoulder higher responsibility as the public funding on the infrastructure and many other sectors are initially done with. Then there is, of course, the community and NGOs, etc. There also some funding will come from them. And of course, from the individual level also, at least from the people who can afford or can help in the process. So Nepal, again, in the investment sector, will have to be very careful about prioritizing the projects, for new investment, but also it will need continued investment in such areas as gender, health, education. Health is, of course, going to be very big in the days ahead, at least in the foreseeable future. With all that, the funding deficit will still be there, however. Towards that, Nepal will have to rely on foreign investments and foreign aid. Now, my 3rd I is institution. You very well know, anyone following Nepal's polity closely, in 2017, Nepal held the first 3-tier elections, which 3 elections to 3 tiers of government: local bodies, provincial, and of course the federal government, which means there's been a huge devolution of power. I would say it's an ongoing process, but this is a first cycle. So the provincial and the 7 provincial governments, there are 7 provincial governments, 753 local governments, and their institutional capacity, even put it as an understatement, I mean, it's a huge understatement, leaves a lot to be desired. But there are also, thankfully, some institutions. For example, there are like provincial parliaments in place. Within the federal parliament, there is a parliamentary committee that oversees, that has oversight authority on SDG goals. So these things will have to be energized further, institutional building. 1, 2, there could perhaps be even competition among provincial governments for not just for the funds, but also in terms of delivery, not just for attracting the funds, but also in terms of delivery. And the provincial parliament and the provincial bodies, but also the local bodies, as much as competition among them, there should also be institutional mechanism put in place that will oversee the fact that the SDG goals and SDG priorities are internalized in the policy making right from the grassroots level. And my 4th point is, of course, implementation. We've seen historically in Nepal that even when the funds are in place, oftentimes the implementation has been poor. Perhaps the institutional oversight will go a long way towards addressing that issue. Now I come to my last point, which is international stakeholders. There are already institutions in place, not very robust, but there are. For example, with yes, with MDGs, the SAARC countries work closely with UN agencies, UNDP mostly, to achieve certain targets. There is similarly BIMSTEC, that institutional mechanisms should come into play, could be brought into play. Then there are also new lenders like AIIB, and we could also look for funds from BRI. I don't know how that will pan out in case of Nepal. Nepal first submitted, you may know, 30-odd projects, BRI projects. It was further brought down to 9 or 10 now. And hopefully for these large projects, there could be funds under the BRI umbrella. Within the donors, however, there should also be, cooperation so that certain sectors are not crowded, while the others don't get prioritized. That's another. The coordination among donors is also very important. Since this issue came up, and I wasn't expecting this, the issue of geopolitics, I would say that Nepal clearly has a lot of alignment with India, not least that we are both democratic and open society, not to talk of our long and historical cultural ties and shared values. And those things should be always, considered in India. Oftentimes I see that there's a lot of insecurity, as Ambassador Puri gave his viewpoint on Nepal. I would just like to kind of, point out one or two points, not too many. Because of these shared cultural values and also history, and for me at least, the most important point, our shared democratic ideals and democratic institutions, one is at play right here now. We are talking through webinar and listening to each other without having to worry too much about the how I would be perceived at the other end. This should be further exploited. Each other's sentiments should be further heard and listened to. And those are institutions and areas that we can build on. I don't want to ramble too much. I think I've covered most ground that I wanted to, and I'll be very happy in the spirit of open discussion to partake of anything that comes up. Thank you. Thank you again for listening.
Thank you, Akhileshji. That was, again, a very fine presentation of your views and much to think about. Since we are running slightly short of time, I'll race through the remaining speakers whom we have on the list, and hopefully there'll be a brief time for discussion also. Mr. Vishal Thapa, economist and managing director, Saral Urja, if you're there, could you please now share your thoughts with us? Mr. Thapa.
Great, thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for inviting me to this session. It's a great privilege and honor to be here among such distinguished dignitaries and eminent individuals. Thank you very much. I'll just reflect on a few points. I'll keep it short. I think many of the points have already been covered and addressed. While we are clearly in what we label as an unprecedented crisis, I think what it has also done is expose the vulnerabilities that we've always had. The absence of resilience has been striking, and our ability to bounce back, of course, depends on not only that we build the basis for the future, but also how we continue to take care of the existing vulnerabilities that have continued to bog down our growth and other elements of progress in general. The SDGs are clearly something that we echo. I think it's a very good shared set of goals, and earlier in the conversation, there was already some description of what went into making these goals. But I think the question for us to ask, perhaps in this forum, and at least it is my favorite question, is, so who really is responsible for delivering on the SDG goals? I think if I think on this conversation, at least if I reflect, Government seems to be paramount. Government is the one. But I challenge that hypothesis, and I want to perhaps draw your attention to at least the way I look at developments in Nepal. Even though I live and work in India quite considerably, I still, because I'm Nepali, I guess I have the opportunity to think through some of the issues there much more. Is who really should be responsible for SDGs? And clearly the answer is government has a role. But I think there's a big role for businesses as well. Businesses should be held far more accountable to the SDGs as well. And one way to do it is obviously look through sustainability frameworks. Industry already has a fairly complex and well-established mechanism, and I would say scientific process for looking at sustainability. They look at inclusion, they look at environmental factors, they look at other factors. But I think sustainability also has to be broadened, because many of the SDG goals are not, the progress on SDG goals may not be realized, not because we don't have the capability, we don't have the resources, but there's something obstructing in the political economy. There's some obstructions. There is political interference, there is political malvoyance, all sorts of issues. And so my question is really, do businesses have a role, not just in terms of delivering on growth and environmental stewardship, but also much more in terms of the political economy and an obligation to think about political stability, to think about political justice, to think about social justice, and also to think about empowerment. And I want to draw the example from Nepal. I think one of the challenges in Nepal that I've seen is that there is a greater and greater erosion of trust and confidence in public institutions. We don't believe the government. As a citizen, I feel like it's not individual political leadership anymore, but it is very, very systemic institutional leadership, institutional failureships. And so when you have a complete erosion in this kind of institutional public institutions, what has happened is basically the economy has turned from being an economy of rule-based economy to more an entitlement-driven economy. Everything is driven by entitlements. And so that exacerbates the kind of erosion in public trust in institutions. So do businesses have a role? My contention is that businesses should have a role. They have to formulate a new sort of framework, sustainability framework that they adopt, that works not only to look to grow, growth, or to provide the impetus for growth, employment, investments, etc., but that begins to recraft itself as sort of being away from the shadows of government to one that can work towards building some of this trust again in institutions. Throughout, in the earlier part of the conversation, there was a lot of discussion about regional cooperation, regional collaboration, and regional markets. And I've been in the energy sector for 20 years. And I'm very troubled every time somebody, even like the World Bank and others, characterize this regional collaboration on energy as a regional market. It's not a regional market. It is a collaboration between governments. And governments do all sorts of things. When they want, they build a transmission line. When they don't want, they don't build a transmission line. It's also important to remember that the Dhalkebar-Muzaffarpur line, which saved Nepal from a very, very painful electricity crisis, took almost 10 years to build, when the actual construction of it was completed in 18 months. This is not a market. It is a regional cooperation between governments. My contention is, if we want to really have SDGs, business chambers such as PhD and others in Nepal, India, and in other parts of the world, I think have to come together to be able to show that it is possible to do business without being subject to the idiosyncrasies of government. Government make all sorts of decisions for all sorts of reasons. The reasons reflect historical, geopolitical, strategic, all sorts of things. But I think if we want regional collaboration, we have to get away from the shadow of government and be able to put forth a narrative that says businesses can work together in a rule-based economy and must find ways to lobby for that rule-based economy. This means that they have to come together increasingly and put together sustainability framework that challenges the monopoly of the state and begins, at least in Nepal, to be able to restore some of the faith that we have lost in our public institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Papa Saab, you made some very, very important points. In fact, I had also said earlier that SDG, attainment of SDG goals is everyone's responsibility, not just that of the government. And certainly, business should look upon itself as being a much more active accelerator, as it were, of SDGs. If we want to have a more caring and sharing society and a better world post-COVID, then business will have to play a much more proactive role. A simple instance is the use of science and technology. With computerization and so on, I myself sit on the board of some companies. Very often, it is the tendency on the company's part to celebrate the introduction of computers in their factories, which would enable them to save on cost, increase profits, and get rid of a lot of manpower. But that is really perhaps a terrible way to go about business if we want to have a more sustainable future. But this is something that we need to discuss much more in detail as we go on. May I request Mr. Kedar Neopane, board member of the Nepal Policy Institute, to come in now? Mr. Neopane?
Yes, thank you for giving me the floor. Considering the time, I will be present in a small presentation because some of the issue I wanted to talk about SDG, which previous speakers have spoken. So I will not repeat those things because I share the similar view. My presentation will be based on the real process and SDG review. Earlier in March, there was a review of SDG goals in Nepal, and Nepal Policy Institute participated, and I was deeply involved. I will share some of the experiences because many of the previous speakers have spoken many of development issues, challenges. Sometimes one or two might override it, or I may even comment in between. What I found out that there is a very much disconnect. Who already came? Who is responsible for the SDG implementation? And that was a big question I found, and when I was talking to them. My experience comes from the discussion, the input. I was coordinating the BPR, Voluntary People's Review. It came from the grassroots level. There were 153 civil societies. They coordinated their presentation and all 17 goals. Of course, 17, but the 14 goal was not part of the relevancy to the Nepal. And 38 of the civil societies from the grassroots level covering the whole of Nepal, they contributed on the all 16 goals, minus one, as I said. So what I found out was, as Ambassador Puri already said, the people are awakened, they are very conscious what they need to do. But then what I realized, sometimes they cannot answer what, why, when, if you ask them. They speak out what they need to be done. They have become familiar of the SDGs, but they cannot prioritize. And that question of priority also came earlier here in discussion. And obviously in the context of the COVID-19, it's even more confused at the local level than we can ever imagine. And in some contexts, I even found out, of course, in Nepal, at some point in time, they said, we will not even have a COVID crisis, a kind of thing, because that was the early stage. So Nepal almost declared like a COVID-free, if you remember February, March. So that also shows that how much the political influence comes in Nepal and everything what Nepalese do. Sorry, I said Nepalese because, I live in Geneva and I have worked the last 40 years in the UN system, covering almost all regions, part of the world, including Africa, Asia. So my perspective goes very differently from the high level. And this was the first time when I was involved, I found out Nepal is conscious what they need to do, but they do not know how to do. Now, with the introduction of federalism, the question I think the Akhilesh Haji already has spoken, they have not been empowered with the power, what they need to do. And when we talk, when they realize they are all conscious, they do not know who is responsible within even the provinces. And the capacity in each provinces are very different. It's a good idea to think all the provinces will do. But province 1 and province 5, when you compare, there is like a difference between sky and the earth. They just have a very different view because the knowledge and the capacity is not there. Of course, the SDGs are a universal goal. The misunderstanding is that we all have to focus on equal priority in all 17 goals. That's how it came out from the grassroots level. And I was always telling them, no, I think we should prioritize in our own analysis. And I was advocating, as our colleague in the World Bank said, is $1.10 is the poverty definition. Nepal's poverty definition is a faulty. And I don't know if many of you know, the abject poverty is if you have 6 months, 1 meal a day, below that is considered. So it is not monetized. Only in 2018, World Bank has introduced multidimensional poverty definition. And if you look at that, the $1.90 per capita is, I think it's almost 20 years old. And with the inflationary, I think adjustment, World Bank has already gone into different definition. And now it is $1.90. And I think we should all in the region, I think it could apply across our South Asia. We must use $1.90 because then it includes access to health, access to education, etc. Also, this will come. Otherwise, how can we bring all people, as SDG's goal is leaving no one behind? Leaving no one behind is on a multi-dimensional approach. So that's why I thought we should think in that terms in our own planning. It's just a suggestion. And that came out from my own analysis of the review in Nepal. And there is disconnect. Already the issue came, government and civil society and institution in Nepal, because after the civil societies made their presentation, the government prepared a report. I was just sharing the experience, as I said. For HLPC presentation, it was a very flowery report. If you look at the HLPC report presented by the government, it does not really reflect what the local people have already presented in their, they have a separate report. It says that we have made all 2019 goals. It's true, many of them have been made, but it does not talk about the shortcomings. I just give you an example in the SDG goal 4, which is about education. There is a lot of focus on quantity, number of schools, number of attendance, but it doesn't talk about the dropouts. There is a 20% of the students, they all are dropped out between class 8 to class 10 or 11. But then these groups are left out. And what we found out, these 2.0 people they are very poor, Dalits, Janajatis, and these people are always left out from the mainstream. And that brings to me this issue of the SDG goal 1. If SDG goal 1, if we take it, which is end hunger, poverty, health, how can we do that when you have not been inclusive in our own planning? So here also in the discussion, I'm noticing there is a lot divide between haves. As we all know, after the liberalization, there has been a lot of creation of wealth in the world, including India and Nepal. But those who have on the other one side of the, they all advocate that side, but we have not been able to address the real difficulties of those left out. I think that's our main challenge. And this is what we have been doing as a think tank, and I think we should include. And that's one of the successes. The other one is what we found out, the people, due to lack of leadership, they think SDG goal is a UN goal. That doesn't have to do anything to do with us. So of course, and our recommendation in that process would be government of Nepal should build capacity on the provincial authorities. Maybe they should also have some planning officer or whatever, I do not know at this point in time. And they should lead the process. And SDG goal must be part of the budgetary process and the planning process. And there is a disconnect between the bureaucrats, politicians, and the civil societies there. There is a lack of coordination because, as I said, there is a general feeling it's a UN-led process. We have to do all things. So why the hell we have to do kind of a thing? I'm sorry I use that language because it was a very frustrating when we realized because there is a disconnect. And that's why I think we will have a long way to do that. And I think already my previous spoke said because in Nepal right now, it is not economic priority. It is always political priority. That's why I think this may have a serious setback in the achievement of the SDG goals. And I think we all, civil society member, a business community, we can play a role. And my own, because of the COVID, let me go back to you. There are 4 goals, top UN has said, 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 1 is no poverty. Number 2 goal is zero hunger. Number 3 goal is good health and well-being. Number 4 is quality education. It's these 4 goals, if we can focus on, I think we will turn around and bring people all in the line, because there is no other way. If we do these 4, the goal number 5 will automatically be included. That is gender equality. Because lack of education, let's say, I know in the panel we have seen some economists, you all knew. I have not known myself, I'm also an economist. I have worked last 40 years in development all around world. I have never found a country which will move ahead if we cannot focus on the quality education. This is the biggest problem. If you have a quality education, you can compete all over the liberalized world. Like, look at the example of India. You with your institution, good institution, all Indians. Now technology, when it comes, it all dominates by Indian. I'll give you one example. When I used to work, I was involved in the one UN agencies, the reform of the IT section. I was called because of the field. It's a good example. And we have a colleague who was used to deal with the IT. And there was an international conference organized in Texas. So our colleague is a friend of mine also. He went there. They sat in a meeting. There were 15 people around. Nobody's talking because nobody begins the meeting. So what happened was they were all from Chennai. They didn't even realize that this is the international conference. It happens to be all from India. And in the end, they all talk in the same language. They completed the meeting. So India is the forefront now in the IT. So there is a quality education in certain areas of India. But in Nepal, I am sorry to say, there is no quality of education. So when you have quality of education, there is no inclusiveness. When there is no inclusiveness, everybody is left behind, those who are in the lower strata of our economy. So that's all I wanted to say, that I think since it is the SDG, so I do not want to dwell in the politics of the region, and we all are familiar of our difficulties. I think I urge all participants to be vocal on those people who are left behind. Let's work for them also, because we all are fortunate enough, we have something to do. So I think if we want to have a sustainable development, I think we need to bring them also. We can save the world, but if you don't save the people, and what is the meaning? And that's what I want to say. And thank you very much for giving for the opportunity. I would have said more, but I would not like to say now, because many of the nice things, good things have already come in, and I'm sure we will have another opportunity. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you, Mr. Nepal. I think it's a very good reminder again that thanks to COVID, it's the poorest countries in the world which are going to suffer the most, and the poorest people in every country are also going to suffer the most. So somehow we have to give top priority to that particular aspect. May I request Mr. Anukul Bhatnagar now?
Sir, he's not here. He could not join today. So we'll invite Mr. Jayendra Srestha. Mr. Jayendra Srestha.
Sorry, did I forget him? My apologies. Yeah, Mr. Jayendra Srestha.
Jayendra, you are there?
Yeah, namaskar.
Yep, namaskar.
Am I through?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Please.
thank you very much. Chair, Excellency Ambassador Mr. K.V. Rajanji, distinguished guests, distinguished panelists, participants. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for providing me this opportunity to put some thoughts on this session. It is rightly pointed out in the very beginning by Mr. Sanjay Agrawal that we need a shared vision on SDG, perhaps. All 17 SDG enablers are equally important, but we need to identify critical interventions that are really required at this moment. I appreciate Mr. Akhilesh Ji as well as Kedaji that we need to prioritize according to our needs and available resources and internalize SDG accordingly. Hence, the prioritization is must. And prioritization is even pressing now, considering the impact of COVID-19. Economic contraction called upon by COVID-19 will hit hard, particularly people at lower strata because of loss of jobs and with no income to support their livelihood. As rightly stated by Excellency Ambassador Manjeet Singh Puriji, this is a wake-up call for all of us. If we really want to fight and eradicate poverty and hunger, accordingly, we need to reimagine and redefine our future course of actions in terms of SDG and internalizing it in socio-economic development. Therefore, I feel that at this moment, redefining and repositioning ourselves in terms of SDG implementation is a critical task and need to take stock of the following. First of all, at this moment, people should be at the first place and their lives and livelihood to be considered as a first priority. In this context, SDG 1, 2, and 3 and SDG 6 should be taken as utmost priority actions to be included in recovery plan of our nation. Considering a need for sustainable development in line with SDG 7, 8, and 13, the impact of climate change, focus should be on development modality of green economy. And in this aspect, Nepal and India can cooperate with each other in development of clean energy resources, which is fundamental for green economy development in our countries. Severe impact of climate change on people, lives and poverty as picturized by Mr. Abbas Haji from World Bank is very alarming for people living in South Asia. At this difficult time, world require international collaboration to defeat the coronavirus impact and coronavirus itself and for the economic recovery. International solidarity and partnership as outlined in SDG 17, including regional cooperation and cooperation between India and Nepal, is very vital and important enabler for the progress and prosperity of all in this planet. Thank you very much. This is all.
All right, thank you. Sir, are you there? Ambassador Raj. Now we'll request Mr. Yugal Joshi to kindly present his views. Sir, Yugal, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Yugal Joshi. Maybe he's not here.
No, he's here. I think he's here. He need. Yes, sir. Please.
Namaskar, everybody. Thank you, Excellency KV Rajan Saab and Atulji. Thank you so much. It's a privilege to joining all these luminaries here today in this topic, redefining SDG enablers for India and Nepal. I will focus my talk only on three things. Number one, India and Nepal, they both together achieved SDG 6.2 in September-October 2019. Few takeaways from that. Number two, in COVID times, how we are dealing with these things. And third thing, Jal Jeevan Mission, the 6.1, primarily how we are faring in last 1 year since its announcement. First of all, as we all know, all these social goals, they cannot be achieved unless they don't become central theme of the national discourse. And as far as achievements of 6.2 concerns, safe sanitation for all, we in India give credit to 4 Ps, 4 important Ps, which led this Swachh Bharat mission or Clean India movement successful in India. First of all was the political leadership of the Prime Minister. As far as my experience in working in Singapore goes, what I learned there is that the kind of things Lee Kuan Yew did for water, almost same thing our Prime Minister here, Narendra Modi, have been doing for sanitation as well as for the drinking water facilities. So political leadership, we in fact have been very fortunate that in his all discourses, in his Mann Ki Baat radio addresses, and his public events, he have been talking about sanitation all the time. In fact, if we go by the data that out of those, all his Mann Ki Baat, which he talks on radio to nation, 70% of those have sanitation as a theme. Second was the public finance, whether the COVID era, before COVID era, we have been, in fact, there is a UNICEF study of 2014 and 15 that to achieve safe sanitation as well as the drinking water facility, how much India should spend. And in India, we have been able to provide a huge budget for sanitation. Almost it was 1 lakh crore rupees for 5 years. Similarly, for Jal Jeevan Mission last year announced by the Prime Minister, there was huge budget outlay for that. Roughly 3.5 lakh crore rupees were provided for that. Third thing was the partnership. Whenever we talk about these all social programs to succeed, our findings were that strong partnership, whether these are with the development partners, whether the faith leaders, as faith leaders are very strong in India as well as in Nepal. Third thing is the media star power, whether they are cine stars, cricket or sports personalities or any other luminaries from their respective fields. But on top of all these, whether these are the political leadership, public finance, partnerships, the topmost thing is the public participation. We have been, in last 4 and 5 years, we have been trying to figure out how people can be motivated to be a part of these movements. So, all these SDG goals are interconnected. And unless and until we have people very actively, willingly participating in that, we cannot achieve success. I would like to cite 3-4 examples of public participation. And in those all public participation, women and children have very important role to play. Because all said and done, these shortcomings, these issues of sanitation, water and other, they affect women and children the most. So it has been, we have been very fortunate that 3 decades ago, we had that Panchayati Raj amendments, and because of that, we ensured that there is 33% representation of women in Gram Panchayats and others. So now after this 3 decades, all those women representatives, slowly, initially, there were issues like Pati Sarpanch, where, male was basically de facto ruling the Panchayat instead of his wife. But now after 3 decades, there are very strong women leadership in villages, in Panchayats. And the second thing is that somehow we were able to tap that. In fact, it was Prime Minister's idea that we should call them Swachh Shakti. And Prime Minister himself organized at least minimum 3 such events where he called entire, all sarpanches who were associated primarily with sanitation things and who has shown some kind of exemplary leadership in sanitation to 3 of his events. Normally, we organize them during International Women's Day on March 8th. Children participation becomes important because children, when they go back from school, if there are some kind of process in the school where teacher asks simply whether you have a toilet at home or not, then if children doesn't have, they go back to their respective homes and kind of make an atmosphere in the home that, parents should build toilets for them. So we did a little experiment in 2017, in September 2017, where we asked students to write, essays on the need of toilet in their home, as well as to draw paintings about how is their idea of a Swachh Bharat or Swachh villages. And you will be surprised to know that 2.89 crore children painted what kind of happy home they would like to see. And 2.7 crore people write their ideas about toilet and its utility in their household. So joining people, making it a people's movement, Jan Andolan, was, I think, primarily that, led everywhere. If you go to India these days, we ran a very small campaign called Swachh Sundar Shauchalay. And we invited all Indians who have built their toilets through government incentive, who had received those government incentive of 12,000 rupees to paint their toilets. So we did this in January 2019. And to our utter surprise, within a month, it was a month-long campaign, and we said that whosoever will paint their toilets most beautifully, Prime Minister will award those toilets. So Prime Minister participated, and we got 1.33 crore toilets painted in rural India. So today, if you visit rural India, you can have those beautiful specimens, which don't need too much money, too much investment for these, but they are the best symbols of what a good IEC can be. Similarly, like Swachhata is not possible until and unless only one department works for it. Similarly is for water, drinking water, because in India, normally when I was a student, my teacher used to say that in India, two computers don't talk to each other. So if all departments of government of India, all states, all districts, gram panchayats, they all are aligned to a cause, then it becomes not that difficult. For example, I would like to just give you one example that in 2018, there was the idea that Swachhata should be everybody's business. So we asked all departments and ministries of government of India to have sanitation as one of their core themes and should provide some kind of budget for it. Finance Ministry also agreed, and they put a budget number for this thing, Swachhata Action Plan. And within a year, we got 18,000 crore rupees for this from different ministries. So they put some kind of money for sanitation work within their sphere of work. So whether that was ISRO or that was Home Ministry or everybody started doing those sanitation things wherever their area of influence are. So that by that way, Panchayati Raj Ministry or the Rural Development, Animal Husbandry, all working in the villages, Ministry of the Department of School Education, Department of Higher Education, everybody pitched in. So just I would like to say is there, if we want to achieve these social goals, we have to make them everybody's business. Now, post-COVID, in fact, we announced Rural India Open Defecation Free in October 2019. Even at that time, we found that there were huge gaps. And gaps happen because normally the target survey was done in 2012. Then in 2019, we discovered that there were roughly 1.7 crore people, households who were requiring these toilets. So we, there were two more things. One is to provide toilets to everybody. Second is to sustain that thing. All the surveys, third-party surveys, we found that, okay, at least 89 to 90% people are using these toilets. So we thought that this program should continue for sustainability. Now coming to COVID time, we were very fortunate that budget line were not dried up to that extent which the other department and ministries were. But still, we thought that this would be a good idea to give employment to people as well. So the government of India's scheme Garib Kalyan Rozgar Abhiyan, which government of India started for a period of 6 months in 6 states which were mainly affected by the migrant labor population. So we thought that it's a good time that, though we have talked about rural households in Swachh Bharat Mission, but we never talked about the community toilets, especially in hard bazaar areas or the public places where rural population often meet either weekly or a daily basis. So we thought that it's a good time that if we have some kind of target to build those community toilets during this period, then this will give, a lot of employment to masons, the rural people who are coming back from cities and other places. And to the credit of the people of India, we found that roughly as on date, 80% target is almost about to be achieved. Similarly, in Jal Jeevan Mission, we have been doing a good progress since its announcement last year, because the Prime Minister in 2014 said that, okay, let us build, let us make India open defecation free within 5 years of time. And that was achieved. So similarly, last year's clarion call was that every household in India should have tap water connection. Target was huge. It's roughly 18.5 crore households. So within a year, that's a good news that 2 crore people have got these tap connections. Our focus have been, to integrate rural people, to educate them, to make them aware, to integrate them in action plan making. So it's a kind of bottom-up approach where people sitting in their gram panchayats, they think about the water resources. They start planning for how water will come, and most importantly, which connects Swachh Bharat Mission and Jal Jeevan Mission is the grey water management. So with SBM phase 2, where our emphasis is now sustainability of the ODF status as well as solid and liquid waste management, having both the parts, biodegradable as well as plastic waste, Govardhan being cattle population huge in India, and finally the fecal sludge management. So at a point we could find out a convergence between Jal Jeevan Mission and Swachh Bharat Mission. So we are hoping that next 5 years we will be truly making our villages not only equipped with the tap water facility, but maybe they will look more cleaner, more healthier. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yoshi. I think we are all grateful for the historic transformation that is taking place in India in the fields that you mentioned, for which your ministry is responsible. I think this is something that will be realized in the years to come. But it is a fantastic achievement on the part of the Government of India under the leadership of the Prime Minister. Thank you very much. Before I request Mr. Atul Thakur to intervene, may I just invite any of the panelists, if they wish to speak for a couple of minutes on what the others have said. Mr. Agarwal, Senior Vice President, would you have anything to say, or Ambassador?
Podel. Sir, can I read out?
Yeah.
He's asking,
just give me a minute while I get my video back.
Right, sir, right.
Go on to someone else and I'll come back to you.
Okay, sir. Just one question is for you, nothing. Mr. Keshav Podel is the chief editor of Spotlight magazine, Kathmandu. He is asking Ambassador Puri how important regional and bilateral cooperation to achieve SDG in the context of COVID-19.
I'm there.
Yes, sir. Can I repeat? Should I
Yeah,
repeat? Yes, sir. He's asking Ambassador Puri how important is regional and bilateral cooperation to achieve the SDG in the context of COVID-19.
Atul, thank you very much.
Right.
In my opinion, regional cooperation is of utmost importance in terms of the economic growth and development of all our countries, and certainly in terms of combating the economic recession that COVID is unleashing. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind, and I'm happy that the Government of India has certainly been active in terms of sharing both medical as well as other equipments, and in terms of its knowledge on the combating of the COVID crisis. But I believe that the economic downturn which is coming about demands that countries come together. And since this is a webinar on India and Nepal, countries which not only have an old and historic sharing, but which have institutional arrangements which allow our economies to work together. I believe this is particularly important. And I leave the thought naturally for my Nepalese colleagues, although for India too, it's an automatic win when you have the Nepalese economy working in tandem with you, because Nepal is an important partner for India. Let's understand that you are among our larger trade partners in terms of so many other connections, etc. So the importance of the Nepalese economy can never be understated as far as India is concerned. But for Nepal, it is, in my opinion, of paramount importance. And so therefore, if the two governments, people, businesses, and I very much like Vishal Thapa having mentioned the role of businesses, I think that's very important. What can businesses do? Well, most important is that they build up connectivities and connections which are resilient to the different ideas that governments may have, and play their important role on ensuring that the relations remain smooth and relations remain uninterrupted. I think that's a role which is particularly important for governments, for businesses to do. Naturally, they are also part of the ecosystem in which governments have a certain predominant role, and it goes on. So I'm grateful to you for asking the questions, a great one. But it is important that we work together, because I don't think, at least in our living memory, we have faced the kind of crisis that COVID has unleashed for us. And I'm not only talking about the medical issue, but I'm talking in terms of the slowdown and the recession. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we are reaching towards the end, and we'll request our SC, Mr. Saurabh Sanyal, to give his vote of thanks. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Atul. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to, on my own and on behalf of PhD Chamber, I wish to propose a hearty vote of thanks. I have the session chair, Ambassador KV Rajan, Chairman of the Indian Nepal Center, PhD CCI. The session co-chair, Mr. Nirvana Chaudhary, Chairman of the India Nepal Center, Nepal, and Vice President CNI, MD Chaudhary Group in absentia. I believe he could not join today because of an urgent meeting. Mr. Sanjay Agarwalji, our Senior Vice President, PhD Chamber. Ms. Akanksha Sharma, the Head Social Impact and Sustainability, Sterlite Technologies Limited. Ambassador Mr. Manjeet Singh Puri, India's former ambassador to Nepal. Address of the Chief Guest, Mr. Abbas Jha, Practice Manager, Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management, South Asia Region, World Bank. All the other distinguished speakers, Mr. Yugal Joshi, Mr. Umar Ahmed, Mr. Akhilesh Upadhyay, Mr. Bishal Thapa, and Sri Jainendra Shrestha, Mr. Kedar Newpune. Thank you so much for giving your very, very good articulation on the webinar Redefining SDG Enablers for India and Nepal. On behalf of the PhD Chamber and of Commerce and Industry, I am pleased to acknowledge the remarkable contributions made by you all panelists and offering my heartfelt thanks for making today's webinar very meaningful and successful for not only the panelists, but also for the participants who are present here and who are listening to you. I also extend my sincere thanks to Sri Sanjay Agarwalji, who set the pace, the tone and tenor, and our chair of the session, Ambassador KV Rajan, for giving the opening remarks and setting the tone of the conference today. The very well-informed and insightful addresses by the chief guest, Sri Abbas Jha, Practice Manager from South Asia Region, World Bank, and Ambassador Mr. Manjeet Singh Puri, India's former ambassador to Nepal, were very, very, very innovative and very, very informative. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for giving those insights and overview of the SDGs and the lives and livelihood balancing. Thank you so much for sharing these important facts. PhD CCI strategic partner, the Confederation of Nepal Industries, has been significantly contributing for the economic development of Nepal and the South Asian region. Even in trying times like now, it continues to inspire the industry to contribute in wealth creation and inclusive growth framework. In fact, yesterday itself, we had a brainstorming session as to how to get the Asian Chambers of Commerce and create a union of the Asian Chambers for sustainability and growth. I think this is a very, 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 very innovative decision taken by the CNI in participation and collaborating with the PhD Chamber to take this agenda forward, where there will be more than 23 Chambers of Commerce within the Asian region who will deliberate on all these points, and it will be the way forward for the future such pandemics or such huge, calamities which may come or may occur in the times to come. I mean, we have to support each other. We have to look after each other. We have to create a very, very vibrant business and consumer and people-to-people contact, so that in Asia, while we are living together, we also create a very homogeneous and a very good cultural and business related ethics, and we continue to sponsor each other, continue to prosper together, and that is what is meant by the SDGs. Earlier in the 2020, to mitigate the economic losses and ensure rebounding, under aegis of India-Nepal Center and in association with the CNI, PhD Chamber organized remarkably successful web conferences. I would just like to mention them under the chairmanship of Ambassador KV Rajan and Shri Chaudhary ji. Some of these were strategizing economic rebounding and cooperation in India and Nepal on the 30th of April, exploring hydroelectricity potential in Nepal on the 23rd of July, enhancing cooperation for MSMEs in Nepal on 31st of August. These conferences were very, very successful and were attended by hundreds of participants, not only from the government and industry, but also from the media, the think tanks, and the economic diplomacy fraternity. In the wake of COVID-19 outbreak, the lives and livelihoods have been severely impacted, and also the businesses, especially the MSME businesses, have seriously got impacted. As the crisis has a global nature, India and Nepal are also seriously impacted with the crisis created by this pandemic. In this difficult time, when our priorities are to keep India and the neighborhood safe from the severe challenges posed by COVID-19, the industry should be determined to work in close tandem with all the concerned and help the region to successfully come out of this crisis. Let's all endure our resolve to support the collective mission to defeat COVID-19 and continue to be part of the holistic efforts for economic rebounding in India and Nepal. The shared vision for achieving the SDGs will be very vital, as every panelist has brought out, and this is going to create a way for sustainable future of humanity. Moving forward, we are trying our level best to keep India's inclusive growth momentum on. In the process, we are very much open to engage with the industry and the fraternity of people in Nepal to carry forward the mission of creating shared prosperity in the South Asian region. In this process, we will prioritize the SDGs and will keep intact India's unwavering commitment for sustainable development in the neighborhood. Thank you, sir. With these words, I once again thank each one of you for sharing a valuable time. It is lunchtime now, and may I wish everybody success, good health, and high spirits. Thank you, and Jai Hind.
Thank you.